is Adam P. Pasquale. I serve as one of the lead pastors here at Walnut Hill. And the session that we're in right now is called From Childhood to Adult. And what I'd love to do, hey, welcome. I'd love to just read to you one of the descriptions of this session as a way to kind of set us up. It says, we want to see our children grow into healthy adults who can navigate all that life brings their way. We want to see their relationship with God thrive. We want to know that they'll be ready for what's to come. But have we really thought about how to get there? Do we have a strategy? And that's kind of the heartbeat behind what we want to talk about this time together. I want to pray in a minute, but before I do that, I'll just introduce myself a little bit and say I've been married for just over 20 years. My wife, Carrie, we met in high school. We have 3 children. My oldest, Elias, is age 13. I have a middle son who's age 11, and my daughter who's age 7. I'll be sharing this session with Jen Ober, who has children who are much older and into the adult years, and her children are all girls. So that will be a nice kind of collaboration between the two of us. Let's pray. You know, Lord, as we come here today, I'm sure that each one of us came with a particular thought or burden on our heart or mind, or perhaps something that we'd love to get from today. And Lord, I pray that you would really speak to us in this session and all the sessions, that we might walk out of here today with something that would help us in our roles to parent the children that you've given us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. So this topic became kind of real and personal to me probably about 5 years ago. I was completing a master's degree. My children were much younger. But during that time period, I was working full-time and doing my master's degree. I felt very physically present in my home. You know, if you looked at my time and where I was there. But emotionally and mentally, I wasn't always there. I was in my work, I was in my schoolwork, and as that came to an end, I said to myself, I've got to do better than this, you know. And my wife and I had some good talks, and we said, what can we do to be more intentional? How do you do this? What does success even look like as a parent? And so that began us on a journey where we started reading more books and watching videos, talking to people. Ultimately, we found this conference that Craig mentioned called Family ID, which really helped us try to say, how do we become intentional? Helped us form like a mission statement for our family, if you can believe that, and a set of values that we could raise our family in. And that was really, really helpful. But I'd say more than all those neat things is it helped us understand how we can be intentional with our family. And it gave us some real life tools. So that's kind of where my heartbeat comes from this, and it's something, it's a passion I certainly carry. Welcome, you can come on in. Just as a setup to this topic, and I don't want to spend too much time here, but just to kind of just tell you why it's so important. If you think about creation, the way God created everything was things began small and things would grow larger. So, for instance, plants started with seeds, and then over time they grew into something. You know, trees started with seeds and they grew into trees. Human beings and animals start the same way. We're birthed as a small life form, and then we grow and mature. For animals, you know, most of that is a physical growth. Human beings, we have physical growth. For the most part, as long as we feed our children something reasonable, they're going to grow, right? We can have a whole other workshop on nutrition. That's not what today's about. But the physical side of life is somewhat straightforward. Now, all of us in our lives and our families have physical challenges and issues, right? So I'm not undermining that, but there is a certain elementary aspect to our physical growth as children. Whether you like it or not, your children will go through puberty, right? That's how it happens. Interesting, with human beings, we're also given this emotional growth that takes place. We're not all born as little life forms with emotional maturity and spiritual maturity as well. And the truth is if you go from one child to the next, from one adult to the next, our experiences in our emotional maturity and physical and spiritual maturity are so vastly different from one another. And when you look at that, a lot of it has to do with the way we were brought up as kids. That's true. Perhaps the surroundings that we were brought up in, or the experiences that we took part in at those ages. And so that's why it's so different. But the question becomes, are there things that we can do as parents to actually help our children in that journey so that they are maturing in the way that God would want them to? So if you consider this, if you look around the world and the history of the world, a lot of cultures have had their thoughts on how to raise children into adulthood. And I just want to give you some examples. In the Amazon jungle, I've read that boys are required to put their hands in gloves that are filled with bullet ants. And it's a test of their endurance of pain. And actually, in order for them to become men, they actually have to wear the gloves 20 different times and prove successful in that. So you say, all right, what is it about this culture that they do that? And the only thing I can come up with, because it didn't say, is perhaps this culture values endurance as a high value, right? Perhaps this culture sees pain threshold as a high value, perhaps, right? In the North, Inuit boys apparently have to go hunting with their dad and successfully kind of get the evening meal to be considered an adult. So in that culture, you see, it's something about life skills that they value as an indication of that child's ability to be an adult. I guess that makes sense, right? In the Jewish tradition, boys and girls were kind of brought through this spiritual maturing process. I don't know if you've ever been to a bar mitzvah or something like that, where there's memorization of the scripture, and really it's the passing on of moral responsibility to a child to say, that is what adulthood means, is you are now accountable to God for following His law and for living a moral life. Similarly, Catholic Church has what you might call a confirmation. Episcopal and Methodist churches have some similar kinds of opportunities in that way. When we look across all cultures, one thing that jumps out is certainly this indication of responsibility, of a child taking on and carrying responsibility as an indication of maturity. I go back in American history and you can see that age 16, George Washington learned to be a surveyor. That's pretty amazing. And at age 17, he actually became the county surveyor. Pretty amazing, right? That's what our history is as a culture. So there's commonality is that there's intentionality in all of these cultures that I talked about. They didn't just leave maturing to chance. It wasn't just something that just happened one day and they said, oh, I guess the microwave finished and the child is now an adult. There's something about maturing. And when you think about that, these cultures almost created guardrails or pathways for children to grow and mature. So, for example, even if you were not the greatest adult in one of these, the greatest parent in one of these cultures, there was so much commonality in the community that everyone was almost walking the same direction. And one child might end up here and here, but they were that way. There was almost guardrails to the culture. If we're honest today, in our Western American culture, our culture has less and less expectations for our children. We have less and less expectations for our teenagers, less expectations for our 20-somethings, and even our 30-somethings. Really, it's quite amazing. And you think about it, we are now seeing the fruit of that low expectations in our culture and the diversity of perspectives and approaches to this pathway to become an adult. I was talking to Jen Ober, and she'll be speaking in a little bit, and she made the comment that it used to be that when you grew up, you probably stayed relatively in the same geographical area. The expectation that you were going to go across the world was probably not there. And so, you grew up and you got your family perhaps, and you bought a farm and you were nearby. Today, I don't know, this could be possible, but in the backs of our minds, the more common experience is that you raise your child and they head off, and you may not see them as often as you used to, once a year, twice a year. And could it be that in the backs of our minds, we almost have a grieving and a mourning process going on from the day our children are born, because we know that point is coming, 18, 19, 20, 21, where they will go off, and everything will change. What does that do to our psyche? I'll tell you, if you're a parent and you're dreading the day that your kids are going off, which I understand, you're probably apprehensive in their maturing process, whether you know it or not. You're probably holding back and not pushing forward as much as you think. When the bird gets kicked out of the nest, that's an intentional process that takes place and the bird flies away. What if we don't kick our birds out of our nests? And what if we're actually sending out signals that are like, no, stay here longer, or no, I'll do that for you, right? I do think there's a point to that there are, whether we realize it or not, as parents in our psyche, we are not pushing as much as perhaps we used to be in the history of the world. So I think that's an important thought, and certainly one we should consider because we play a part in the maturing. So what's the Christian perspective on this? I just want to affirm that in the early Jewish culture, Christianity comes from Judaism, so certainly Christianity took on this idea of helping a child mature into a spiritual adult in their teen years. That would have been surely the case. Teaching the scriptures, helping them own their faith, definitely that was there. Additionally, certainly we see that Jesus became a carpenter like his father. There was this kind of apprenticeship expectation that kids were going to move on and perhaps take on what their parents did. That was there. Throughout the Bible, we won't go into this, but there's passages on disciplining your kids, teaching your kids, instructing them things of faith, teaching them to be self-controlled. We can go through all the fruits of the Spirit. So that was certainly there as part of what parents were teaching their kids. I love what Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13. He's talking about love, but he makes this kind of throwaway comment. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. And that wasn't just some ambiguous thing when I became a man. If you put your kind of Jewish hat on, that was no, in your teen years, when you're going through this maturing process, there's a point where you're like, I gotta step up, I gotta change. It was intentional. It was part of what they did. It was this pathway, these guardrails that enabled maturity to happen. So today, we have lots of messages coming at us from all different directions. And what I'm trying to say is that some of those expectations and those normalcies are not part of our plan. So can we as adults create some things in our lives that would help our kids mature? And how would we even define what that looked like and if we were being successful? And this is just where I want to spend a few minutes. My personal experience growing up was I thought my parents were very intentional in helping me and my two brothers grow and become like adults. It wasn't programmatic, though. And so when I think about it now, it's almost more like flying a kite, where it looks so easy from a distance, but yet that person is constantly pulling and moving the strings to keep the kite out. Or like riding a bike. It looks so easy, but the person is actually balancing and changing their weight all the time. I feel like that's the way my parents were, where they kind of paid attention to each of us and helped us in a different way. I don't know if you realize this, but one of the ways that parents oftentimes raise their kids and help their kids is through mantras. And you might say, I don't know if I've ever passed on values to my kids, or I don't know if my parents ever passed anything on to me. But if I said to you, what was a popular saying that your mom or dad used to say to you, you might be able to come up with something. I'll give you one of mine. My dad used to say, you never go wrong doing the right thing. He embedded that into me. I mean, it was like, if a decision came up, Adam, you'll never go wrong doing the right thing. You'll never regret that. Well, what was he instilling in me? There was a value there, right? Honesty and things like that. So I think in our culture, the other one, by the way, he gave me was this acronym of HALT. He said, you're going to be in trouble if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Watch your decisions when you're in that place. So I think all of us can relate to that. There was some intentionality, whether you know what it was or not. There was something your grandfather said to you that sticks out. And that's kind of what we're talking about. So doing this can be kind of organic. In other words, that's more of an organic approach where something's being passed down to you, whether you know it or not. Or there can be a more planned approach. And you'll have to decide what fits you the best. But doing nothing is not the option. So a few years ago, as my son was getting closer to 13, I started thinking a lot about this topic we've been talking about, this idea of a rite of passage, which a lot of cultures have done before. And what does it look like to actually be so intentional with your child that there is a moment where they, in your eyes and their eyes, they know that you're seeing them different. And I started reading some books on it and seeing some successful models done in that way. And then I came across a book called Play the Man by Mark Batterson. It came out last year, and he was just coming out. I went to a conference, and I heard what he had done with his children. And so I adopted his model, and I actually been doing it with my son Elias for 10 months now. We're on a year plan where I'm helping him kind of step into adulthood. There's been some incredible things that have taken place in there and some frustrations as well, and I'm changing it all the time and trying to figure out him. But what's been the fruit? I've been more intentional. When you look at it, I've changed towards him. And I'll tell you, I've had people tell me, Elias is different. I've seen something change in him this year. Now, maybe that's just some of his natural age, right? 7th grade. But I like to think the Lord's been doing a work on his life. So what I'd like to do is hand out to you a little document that we're going to fill out together. And I'm going to walk you through some of the ways I'm thinking about this and some things I think that would be helpful for you. Now maybe you guys can just help me out with this. Get that out as fast as we can. Are we hanging in there? Doing okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the first I want to say is when I talked about all these different cultures, I mentioned to you one culture valued pain endurance, one culture valued responsibility. What is it today that how would we define a successful, maturing adult? Like, what would we do if we were going to say that? So I've kind of put together a list that is certainly not exhaustive, but I think represents kind of what we're talking about here. The first one, if you want to fill it in, is an indicator of maturity. How would I know if my child was mature? One is faith. Craig talked about that upstairs, so I'm not going to hit that too hard at the moment, but there's something about our job as parents to help introduce God to our children, but more than that, help them actually establish a relationship with Jesus Christ. Wouldn't that be amazing if we could pray for our children and help that be one of the primary things that we want them to have accomplished in our homes? It's really significant, and you do have a part to play in that. And so I think bringing them to Sunday school is important, but as Craig talked about, there's great tools, Family 20, and we're here to help you with that. But what if you looked at your child and said, one of the indications of their maturity will be if they can own their faith, own their spiritual walk with God. Number 2 is values. I wrote, what principles lived out by your children would indicate that they're maturing and becoming adults? Now, you can't make a list of 100 here, but Carrie and I actually sat down with the help of this program, and we made a list of values that we said, at the end of the day, if we could instill these values in our kids, I think we would have gone a long distance. And so I'll just tell you what these are. I want to tell you that in the program we went through with all the different families there, every family had a different set of values, so there's not one answer to this. But for us, we said it's faith, love. That's can they love each other? Can they love God? Can they love their neighbor, right? Faith, love, laughter. I believe that in the midst of life is hard, right? Life has challenges come our way. But if we can teach our children that even during those times that you can have joy and peace and you can relax, that's big. So faith, love, laughter. Teamwork. I'm a true believer that this culture wants us to be independent, and yet successful life and a biblical life is learning to rely on each other and actually partner together. We want to teach our kids teamwork. Stewardship. Right, the book of Genesis, that was one of the big ones that God said, I'm giving you this earth to steward. I want my kids to be able to steward what they've been entrusted with. Not what other people have been entrusted with, but what they have. Can they take care of that? Can they take responsibility for that? And then the last one was gratitude. I just see throughout Scripture that if we have a heart of thankfulness, that in any situation we can see the positive side to it. And so those are the ones we chose. We could have gone on forever, and we did, right? But we condensed them. I encourage you to think through that, and if you can say, if you were going to kind of say to yourself, my child would become an adult, I would see them as mature as an adult if they could carry these values. Do you have that list? Because that's important. Number 3, knowledge. What information do you want to pass on to your children as they become adults? And in other words, what information do you wish you had prior to becoming an adult? Or what information do you wish your parents had told you? I don't want to go too deeply into this, but as an example of that, for certain, I want to pass on to my kids some biblical knowledge. I'd love for them to have some understanding of the Bible. But even more than that, or in addition to that, I want them to know about our family history. I've read an article that says the more that a child knows about where they came from, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the more they feel rooted in their future. They realize they're part of history, and they have a part to play in it. So we love to tell stories about our grandparents, and we even have some knowledge about our great-grandparents. All of that stuff. We love telling our kids stories about that. I want to pass on to my kids some knowledge about marriage and about what do you look for in a future spouse. This will be different, but for you personally, have you ever sat down and said, what knowledge would I want to be able to pass on to my child? I bet you come up with some good stuff, and I encourage you to pray before you do it, because a lot of stuff will come into your mind. What skills, that's the next one, do you want to pass on to your child, which you think would be an indicator of their maturity? What abilities do you think your children should have prior to becoming adults? What abilities do you wish you had prior to becoming an adult? I think that's a really good question to ask. And so here's a couple skills that I'm thinking about. For me, I grew up mowing the lawn. I wanted my kids to be able to mow the lawn. I was even working on my son riding the tractor yesterday. That's something I think he should be able to do. You can create your own list. Cleaning the room, balancing their checkbook, changing a light bulb, right? Driving a car. Even driving a car is not a given anymore. The culture has it for kids. Like, I don't need to learn to drive a car. I'd like my kids to be able to drive a car, right? So there might be certain skills that you want your child to have that are unique to you, and you might want to just know what those are, right? That's an important thing. The next one, experience. What experience do you want your children to have to prepare them for adulthood? What experience do you wish you had prior to becoming an adult? What experiences do you wish you didn't have prior to becoming an adult? All these are good questions to ask. Let me give you a couple examples. I want my children to have experienced youth trips, retreats, summer camps. In other words, being away from mom and dad for extended periods of time while they're in the home, so that when they go off to college or wherever they go, they don't have a sudden crash into this idea of freedom that they've never had before, and or fear, whatever it might be. That may sound like a given, but that's actually an experience we're going to intentionally plan on. What's another one? Here's a silly one. I was in my late 20s before I really got to New York City and understood where to go. And the first time I went, I was scared half to death. I got lost. And well, we're thankful that we have some relatives that live in New York City. I actually want to help my kids learn to navigate New York City at a young age, because I think it'll just make them into a stronger human being. They'll have a better sense of confidence. They'll have a sense of geography. Now, that's a silly thing. You probably are like, I don't care anything about that. But for me, that was something that I was thinking about. One more. Going to the beach. I love the beach. I want to pass on my love to the beach to my kids. Is that an indicator of maturity? No, but I put it on my list. Or maybe it is. And then the last one I'll give you is going out of the country. I was in my late 20s before I left the United States. I think that's fine. But Carrie and I actually have it on our life goal and to get our kids out of the country while they're still growing up. We think we want to shape their worldview. We think it might actually change what they're going to do for a living and what they feel their life calling is going to be. We have a passion for that now, and so we think that's a really important thing we would do. That's an experience we want to have with them while they're kids. You may not care about that, and that's fine if you don't. The idea here is to say, what do you think God's calling for you to have an experience set for your kid as an indicator of the maturity? And the last one, responsibility. How are you helping your children not only do tasks around the house, but actually take responsibility for things? One of my kids' responsibilities, maybe you do this, is like, feeding the cat or dog or something like that. And some days when they don't do it because the animal seems kind of restless. But we've given that responsibility to them, and they know it's theirs. Are you giving responsibilities to your kids? Because that is a major indication. Their ability to actually mess something up and learn from their actions is a big deal. So that's just a little bit idea, and that's organic, but if you sat down and just enjoyed the conversation with each other and said, what are skills? Don't sit down and say, I have to come up with this list, we have to do it in 30 minutes. Like, start the conversation and then put it aside and then come back and make it fun. But I want to suggest to you that these are things that will help you be intentional with your child. Now, let me just switch here for a moment and kind of talk about how you do it now, because we've talked about what you might do or what the content might be. But here's one of the things I would like to say is to take advantage of everyday life. That's how this happens. This organic approach is that you take advantage of every minute of the day. Let me just find this one sheet I have here. First, it says pray every day. I don't know if you pray for your children every day, but that is so important to do. Now, something you might consider to do is build it into a routine that you have so that you don't forget. So I'm assuming every day that you take a shower. You could pray for your children when you shower, or you drive to work. You could use your commute time, or you empty the dishwasher. You could do it then. But if you can build prayer into something that you always do, you're more likely to remember to do it and say, I haven't prayed for my child in a week in an intentional way. No, actually set a place and do it. That in itself will do more than probably we could ever do in ourselves, right? Just praying. Number 2 is taking advantage and making time. The other day, Elias and I are preparing to run a 10K together. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But I want to tell you, and it's a slow 10K on my side, so he's very kind to me, and he kind of slows down. I'm running like a 12-minute mile right now, so nothing to break records. I want to tell you, it was at 23 minutes into our running together that he turned to me while I was huffing and puffing and asked me some question that was actually pretty meaningful. So it took 23 minutes of time together before that came out. Sometimes that's how it works. It's just time. And so you can figure out what that looks like for you, but you have to spend time with your children. And then when that time comes, what is it you want to impart to them? Well, if you looked at our list of things before, if you have in your mind those things that you want to impart to them, when the opportunity comes, there'll be something that you can say to them, not just, what do I say to my child? It's quiet in the car, right? Maybe that's never happened to you. When you do that, I want to encourage you that one of the most important things you can do is use stories to impart these values and wisdom to your children. It's so easy to preach to your kids, but the more that you embed the values into something that happened in my life, the more that they'll remember. Here's a couple things that will happen. When you use stories, they'll feel closer to you. They'll feel more connected to you as an adult and as their parent. They'll laugh, which is good to help them remember. And they realize that you're a human too, which means they're more likely to actually ask you when things are going hard in their life. There's so much that's accomplished in a story. So as an example, I had to discipline and punish Elias yesterday for some bad grades, and so I had to take away media time for 2 weeks, or a week or two. I'm negotiating right now with them. But in the midst of that, I told them a story about a time that I got severely disciplined as a child. And I was able to laugh about it and tell them the difference it made in my life and how it was terrible when it happened, and I was really upset. But I know it sounds silly, but that interjection of the story made the whole thing different, and we actually were laughing with each other afterwards instead of him running off to his room, slamming the door, etc. That doesn't always work, but use stories, right? You can do that with your child. I want to say be appropriately transparent. Obviously, you need to realize what age they are and how much you can tell. One of the greatest things in life, I think, is going to be me retelling the same story to my child every year and them learning new pieces to that story until finally when they graduate, they hear the true full story. But that's part of life. We need to really do that. Next one, increasingly trust them with information. You have to be vulnerable and you have to realize that I don't know if I can trust them with this part of this story yet. You have to feel that. But as they get older, they're hearing lots of stuff in school, right? You can entrust them with more of your life and also increasingly trust them with responsibility. So I just want to say, as parents, we become guides and teachers in the midst of life. That's really how it happens. It's usually responding to what's happening in real life that we actually impart and teach and help our kids. We help them translate what's happening around them. All right, you hang in there?
Yep.
Okay, good. Let me just, for the sake of time, just keep going. I got one more thing I want to share with you before I invite Jen to come up. And that's this, that there's an organic approach, and I mentioned to you there's a pathway approach. And I think both are really good and helpful to do them both. Let me tell you a little bit about this pathway. So I mentioned to you that I read this book by Mark Batterson. It was really helpful. He walked his children, he's done it with 3 of his children, through a year-long discipleship kind of pathway is what they called it. It's really like a rite of passage. And it was really exciting to hear the success that he got from it. So like I mentioned to you, I'm in the middle of it. I have adapted it a little bit and I've added something to it. But let me explain it to you, and then I'm going to actually give to you it's kind of a covenant that I made with Elias when we started this journey together. And it makes it puts it into a formal kind of contract between the two of you. So here's what it is. You develop, the model says to actually take your child away or go somewhere special with them and let them know that you want to invest in them. You see them becoming an adult. You want to invest in them, pour into them, and share with them what you've learned in life and really see them flourish. Like, really kind of build this up as an important moment in your life. And then you've already prepared this kind of contract in one sense, and you walk it through, and then you sign it and they sign it. I did this with Elias, not knowing what would happen. We went away for an overnight. And I tell you what, he said, I would love to do that, Dad, which floored me. And then he signed it, and it was really amazing. Now the rest is on me now to try to keep it going, right? So here's what we did. It had a couple different areas. The first was a spiritual challenge. The idea is to create some things that you would want to impart to your child spiritually in that year's time. For me, I chose reading through the New Testament, that Elias would do that. That would be his challenge. Spending time in prayer each day. We were going to take a prayer servant class together that the church offered. Instead, we took a spiritual gifts test, so I changed it as we went through, a spiritual gifts class. He and I are going through a Follow Jesus class with Craig Mallory right now. It's a once a month, so this is something we're doing together. We're going to participate in a fast this year, which is coming up. And then I'm teaching him our family values. That's our spiritual challenge. It's concrete enough when you read my document that you know if you can achieve it or not. Number 2, an intellectual challenge. Mark Batterson had his child read 12 books that he chose that he thought were important for them to read. I did the same thing, and I really quickly realized that Elias was not going to do it. We read through 2, he got through 2, and I realized it was becoming the thing that I had to keep prodding him on and poking him on. It was not becoming fun for me or him, so I axed it, and I said, you know what, we're going to read this 3rd book together, and that'll be what we do. Schoolwork was enough for him, right? Mm-hmm. So plans don't always work. Number 3, physical challenge. This was really important because the idea was to help your child stretch and go beyond what they're physically able to, in whatever capacity that is. And Elias is actually not incredibly like a strong sports kid. So for him, we chose track, and he and I were going to run a 5 and 10K together, which is actually a challenge for me as well. And so he signed up for the track club, and he's been doing that. He's loving it, actually, I'm amazed by. And so on May 20th, he and I are going to run the Mystic 10K together. And that's going to be really exciting. And then I added a business challenge to it. As a kid, I had a newspaper route, and I did lawns. I just wanted Elias to learn some life skills with business. So he and I helped him start a company called Care for Pets. He designed the business card. He went around to 20 homes in our neighborhood and explained how he could take care of their animals. He got absolutely no sign-ups from that, although I think he did a good job. Although my family they've hired him twice, my dad and my brother, which I'm grateful for. But he's learned something through the process, and we can continue that in years to come. Two other things. The model has you create what you call a celebratory moment, or you might even call it like a rite of passage moment. And so when Elias turned 13, I invited members of my crew over and their spouses, and I asked them ahead of time to write a note to Elias and write the things that they wish they had known about teenage years before, now that they look back, and to write a blessing to him. So over dinner time, they actually each read to him the letter that they wrote. I read a letter, my dad read a letter, and Carrie's dad read a letter. It just so happened he was in town. And it was so special. Elias got up without being prompted and said thank you to each person and gave him a hug. I could tell it made a difference. And he has all those letters now. And we prayed for him. We said, I bless you. And I said, Elias, I see you as a man. And that's made a big difference. It was a marker in his life. The last thing is this experiential reward. The idea is if your child is successful in doing this pathway, that you plan some experience together that you can go on, you've chosen together, that says, well done, and it creates a long-lasting memory for you. It just so happens this year that the church is going on a trip to Israel. We're taking a 40-mile hike from Nazareth to Galilee, and I was able to find a way for Elias and I both to go on that. So at the end of June, as a celebration of this year, he and I are going to do that. It was interesting that my son, Brennan, who is 11, has been watching this take place, and he said to me, Dad, I don't think I want to go to Israel when it's my turn. I want to climb a mountain. So it's interesting. You can see that kids are different, and also they don't have to be expensive experiences. I can drive to Mount Washington pretty easily, and he and I can hike that path. But this is one idea of something you can do. It doesn't have to be 13 years old. You can do this at any point in case your child's beyond that. But this pathway, I think, is a really good thing. What I'd love to do is invite Jen to come up. Jen is in a different stage in life, and your children are all girls, right?
Right.
So maybe you can correct the things that I've said and tell them what really is going to happen.
My name's Jennifer Ober. I live in Newtown. My kids are 31, 30, and 28. And what everyone always says to me is, wow, you were busy. And we were. So, and the thing is about being busy is time just goes by quickly. And Adam was talking a lot about being intentional. I don't think we were nearly as intentional as Adam was, which is great. But I think looking back, there were a lot of things that we did that were really intentional. And if I say nothing else to you today, right now, is that time goes on. And, as Adam was saying, we all think, do we really want our kids to grow up? Do we really want to keep them babies for a little while? And I saw a lot of you, especially women, shaking your heads like, yeah, I liked them when they were babies. I liked them when I kept them young. But I'm going to tell you something. These were my girls when they were, I think they were 10, 12, and 14 here. Lovely, weren't they beautiful girls? And they were really lovely. They're probably about the ages your kids are. And fast forward about 10 years, here they are. I think they were 28, 29, and 30 here, and all married, and they've moved on. And I was thinking when they were this age here, maybe I didn't really want them to grow up. Maybe I had a divided heart. Maybe I really wasn't sure I wanted them to mature into adulthood. But time does go on, and they have moved on, and they have really grown, and they're really, really mature and lovely girls. So when I was thinking about it, I was praying about it, I was like, Lord, I have not been nearly as intentional as Adam. What am I going to say? And this passage came up in Psalm 86. It says, teach me your way, O Lord, and I will walk in your truth. Give me an undivided heart. So that was the first thing I was thinking about, is having an undivided heart was, do we really want our kids to move from childhood to adulthood? And I think in different cultures, adulthood was at 13. I think in our culture, adulthood is more closer to 18. I think sending our kids off to college is sort of a rite of passage. But you have from about 13 to 18, maybe 5 years to shepherd them or to help them, guide them, to mature them too, so the time that they're 18, you're like, yeah, I think you're ready to go off. And so I was looking at 4 different things. And I think mostly as Christian parents, what we want to do is we want to mature our children into Christlikeness. What is Christlikeness like? Wow, that's like amazing. You're trying to think, I'm getting food on the table and getting them out to the bus. I'm getting them to do their homework and take a shower. Well, that's enough. Christlikeness, that's maybe a little bit too much. But if you break it down and say, I want my child to be compassionate. I want them to have a desire to help other people. And I think that one of the things and Adam mentioned this, is how do we look at our kids? And each one of our kids is created differently. They're created with their own skills and their own sets. And I think the children themselves are born sort of with an idea that they really do want, they have a heart for other people and they want to help them. But we need to recognize that in them and then mature that in them. And my oldest daughter is really great at reading. She was a great reader and she loved the written word. And one of the things we did with her is we said, are there other people in your class that don't work really, that aren't as good with the written word? And one of the things, I was at a conference and the teacher said, she's kind of ahead of the class and she's a little bit bored. She's reading underneath her desk. That was maybe like in 2nd or 3rd grade. And I said, well, you know what, maybe what we could do is she could help somebody else, somebody that's not quite as gifted in the reading. And that was something that she did. And she did that when she was like in high school. And that even became like an activity that other kids joined in. And you know what, guess what she is right now? She's an English professor at a school in Virginia. And she and her husband are both college professors, which is kind of a cool thing. And my middle daughter always loved to have parties. She always loved to have people over. She was always the one that said, Mom, get out of the kitchen. I want to do this. She was like 2nd or 3rd grade, and she was like making deviled eggs and stuff like that. So now she lives on a Marine base with her husband. They're not Marines, but they happen to live on a Marine base. And they're constantly having all these Marines over who are single Marines, and she constantly is having these parties and bringing people into her house, having like Thanksgivings where they're away from their homes. She has this real heart for compassion of like bringing people into her home and cooking for them and entertaining. And then my youngest daughter, who always has a heart of compassion for people who are hurt, she would be the one that was like always like pushing people on their wheelchairs or like, oh, Mom, did you see that person was hurt, handicapped? And she's a physical therapist. So somewhere along the way, we saw something in them, and we really said intentionally, I noticed this about you. Is this something that you could do? And we also really believed, and I don't know, this is a different cultural thing, that our girls needed to have a career. They needed to have some way that they were going to be able to support themselves, possibly even support their husbands if they ever got married, and they did get married, but that we felt really strongly that was something that they needed to have a career. But not only a career where they could be successful in themselves or successful in being able to make lots of money, but successful in being able to use the gifts that God gave them and compassion for other people. I'll move along quickly. The second thing is that God is gracious. And I looked this up, and I'm like, what does gracious mean? It really means you want to give more than to receive. And how do you do that with your kids? You say, and I think there are lots of things. I think one of the things is, and you as parents, you're good parents, you want to give to your kids. But let me tell you this, you do not want to be the mom or the dad who makes your kids beg when they go to college. That's embarrassing. That's just embarrassing. And you know what, you're laughing right now, but when you go to college, you're going to be looking around, you're going to see all these mothers making their beds for their kids. I want to tell you a couple of things that we did. You want your kids to be able to cook. I would say make a list of 5 things that they can make by the time they go to college. You want your kids to be able to do their own wash. Make sure that they do their wash. The only way they can do that is by making mistakes and overflowing your washing machine, but they've got to do their own wash. So you've got to be able to make their own beds. Adam said balance your checkbook. Who has checkbooks anymore? But they need to have like some kind of financial idea. And when they lose their credit card or their debit card, do not be the one to call and say, my child lost their debit card or their credit card. They get on the phone and they say, I lost my credit card, how am I going to fix this? Or their phone, or their iPad, or whatever they have. Those are their responsibilities. If they have those things, and those are responsibilities, that's your job to let them do that. What else? Relationships with people. They have to make choices between good relationships and bad relationships. They're going to be good people in their lives, and they're going to be good friends that make influences on them. They're going to be other people who aren't such great friends. I would say, whoa back and say, let them make their own mistakes and let them see. You can nurture them. You can say, oh, this seems like a really good relationship, or these people seem to have good influences on you. But let them make their decisions. You cannot make them for them. And then the third thing is be slow to anger. This is a tough one. I used to get angry. I don't have an anger, I don't have kids in the house anymore. But you know what, one of the things is, anger is not a bad thing. And I think in the Christian church and the church we say, don't be angry. Don't get angry. Anger is a sin. That's bad. But no, anger is just saying that something is wrong. I've been wronged. And that's a sign of self-respect. But the ability to express your anger is the right thing. You can say, I'm angry. Well, why are you angry? I didn't get heard right. I don't feel like I'm loved. I don't feel like I'm respected. Somebody wronged me. But you've got to be able to use your words to say, I'm angry and this is why. Well, how can you work that out? That's something that you take somebody from a child who throws a temper tantrum to an adult. And there are a lot of adults that haven't figured that out. Yeah. And then the fourth thing is abounding in love. You know, that is something that you can't, I don't think you can really teach. I think that kids are, what is the word, that kids catch more than they're taught. I think that one of the things that my husband and I realized early on is that we had to be together on a lot of our parenting. We didn't always agree on everything, but we had to agree on it. So our kids watched us as we loved each other. And we would often say, you know what, honey, you're great, I love you, but your dad is more important to me than you are right now. And that's not always an easy thing to do because your kids are in your face right now. They need things from you. But there's going to be a day when they're going to be out, you hope. And then you and your spouses are going to be together. That's one thing. Pray for your kids' spouses. My youngest daughter got married a couple of years ago, and she had been dating this fellow for about 6 weeks. And I just felt like this is the man that I've been praying for. So they've been only dating for about 6 weeks. And I met him, and I said, oh, Ben, I've been praying for you all my life. Good thing that he stuck. Because that would have been really weird. Yeah, here he was like, just been dating for a couple of weeks. But anyway, pray for your kids' spouses and also talk to them about what do you see? What do you see in my relationship with your dad that you would like to bring out? And I want to tell you, those of you who have girls, your husband's, their father's influence on them is a whole lot more important than their mother's influence. That's hard to even describe, but for you dads that are sitting here, love your daughters, take them out on dates, spend time with them, do a lot of things. Moms have a lot of influence, but dads, you know what? If they want to learn love, that's where they learn it first, is from you. So pray for their future spouses. And I want to say one other thing about grandparents. Be considerate to your grandparents. They loved you first. They were your parents first. They loved you just like you love your children. So be considerate to their grandparents, because that's something that someday they're going to be out of the house, they're going to have their own kids, and you're sure going to want to have them, you know, you're going to want them to still want you in their life. Last weekend, two of my daughters were home for my mother's 80th birthday, and I was saying, you know, what do I say? What do I say? In retrospect, those years just went whoosh. They were just so fast, and I don't know how intentional I was. Did I do a good job? And they were like, yeah, you did okay, John. You were good. Let's talk about this. And my daughter said to me, she said, you know what? This is what I want you to tell them. Tell them they will be surprised how much they enjoy you. Those teen years are tough, but you will be surprised how much they enjoy you and how much we enjoy you as parents. So that's kind of what I have to say about raising or nurturing kids from childhood into adulthood. Do the best you can. You know, all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I can